you said the new culture draws the old culture to it. Is that anecdotal, or have you seen that happen in a number of instances where you're pouring in, you seen it to you said the leaven, the small amount, and it's kind of taking over? Has that been what you've observed pretty consistent, or has that just been your experience?
Well, it's more than anecdotal. I mean, it
Okay.
happens, and it happens not in a flush type sense, but in a drip type sense.
Okay. Well, that was okay.
Slowly, yeah,
Well, that was my
slowly but
second
surely
question.
across. Yeah.
Yeah. So how, like in your situation, what is that drip type sense? What's that time frame before you start recognizing maybe a shift in culture?
Mhm.
Because I imagine for a while you're toiling over here, nothing's happening on the bigger picture. So when do you start, when in your experience again, when do you start seeing kind of the shift overall, like where people are catching on?
Well, I have a real hip pocket. I don't know if I can find it here. I there are sort of three phases that I begin to distinguish. In that um, there's mindset shift. There's a phase in which people begin to shift their mindsets, and this is another um slight revelation that came after spent matches. I was calling people to be disciple makers, multiplying disciple makers, and the reality is I had to apologize to people and realize that I really didn't want them to be multiplying disciple makers. What was it the what was the hidden agenda in my heart is I wanted them to be church planters. I wanted them to plant the gospel where they live, learn, work, and play, and nurture that into a redemptive community. Um, and so that mindset shift sets them up for understanding that they actually could be uh, a part of a church plant team, not in the sense of gathering a group of people, getting enough money to rent some space and start some Sunday gathering. It's not we're not planting a Sunday gathering. We're actually planting the gospel, in, say, their neighborhood, for instance. And so it would have a rhythm that might not look anything like the prototypical definition of the word church in a cultural setting. um, it might meet on Tuesday night. It might have 16 or 20 discovery groups going on around the neighborhood. There might be a leadership team that meets on a weekly basis for prayer and kind of discernment, and it have all kinds of things, but it would be a ecclesia. And so that mindset shift takes for an American who shows up at a church or comes to faith in some form or fashion, and then all of a sudden they come and they're going to follow Jesus, and all of a sudden you say, no, I don't want you to follow Jesus. I want you to go out and be a church planter. um, that takes a while. So 6 to 18 months that it takes people, depending on their personalities and stuff. So the second one is momentum, and anywhere from 18 months to 3 years in that momentum phase, before you get to anything that looks like movement. So you get to multiplication, where you get say consistent second generation growth, and that's huge. I mean, that's just massively huge when you have disciples who are consistently producing disciples. So you've got groups that are producing groups and stuff. Um, and if we were to go to look at say the uh, miraculous movements. Have any of you read Miraculous Movements by Jerry Trousdale?
Mm-mm.
It tells the story of sub-Saharan Africa. So in sub-Saharan Africa, there were, let's start the clock at about 2003, when the first trainings began. Um, it wasn't until 2008 that they saw significant movement, what we would call movement at that point. Consistent replication of churches, building churches or planting churches, and so hordes of disciples multiplying. As you move down, you move down the from churches to groups to disciples. It's like you've got to have a larger group of each one of those in the lower level to get the multiplication at the higher level. So, 5-6 years it took them to really get out of the ground and begin to even experience anything of the long tail type growth that most people tout. And when Jerry wrote the book, it's funny, Jerry just texted me here, tried to call me. When Jerry wrote the book, I've chided him about this several times. He didn't write the underground story. He wrote the above ground story. And everyone writes the above ground story. The above ground story is the glorious story. The below ground story is a bloody story. Mm-hmm. And as we, engage in the West, it's like we aren't really given to persevering like our Eastern brothers and sisters are. I would say even for us here on this screen, there is a modicum of addiction to success. And failing forward is difficult. So, doing something, learning it better by failing, those kinds of things aren't really in our DNA. And it is in their DNA. I mean, if you've been to Africa, they have a presupposition there when a car breaks or something breaks, they just assume life doesn't work. And so when it breaks, it's no big deal. It's like, it's just life. Well, we assume life does work. And when, our fast food doesn't come in that drive up fast enough, I mean, we think, what's wrong with this world? We get upset, and that kind of stuff. We just assume life works. And when we start learning this new way of gospeling and it doesn't really click off the bat, we go on to something else. Maybe Francis Chan's written a new book, or Andy Stanley's got a new podcast, or something. I'm going to find something that's going to work, and we just don't pursue. So that momentum phase is that phase of perseverance, of learning. Most people think of it as a science. They see like discovery, and they make the mistake that DBS equals DMM, and so there's this sense in which they think all I can do is just do DBS. And I've seen some real horrendous things happen in big churches, with just doing that, like crazy, and not realizing there's a leadership, there are principles that need to be put in place that allow the operating system of discovery to really work in that process. So I don't know where I'm going with this, Logan. I'll shut up here.
No. Yeah. That's good. No, that's I appreciate it. And I like how you alliterated that story with the M's. So that's very good. Yeah. Mindset, momentum, multiplication.
I tell you, through all of it, the thing that we've discovered is that you have to hold to the principle that the distance between acquisition and application of knowledge or skill has to be consistently reduced. And so, even in that mindset phase doesn't mean that they're not doing anything. They need to get their fingernails in the dirt. And always, say that I wish I think I do have this on tape. There's a guy in the mountains of North Carolina, in Asheville, North Carolina, who is seeing incredible things happen simply because he just stayed at it. And he stayed at it with his neighbors. He stayed at it with his some of the people, the more needy people in his arena. He gathered some of his fellow Christians to go with him to do some work in some trailer parks and some stuff like that. And he's just seen some amazing stuff happen because he just stayed at it, and he got his fingernails in the dirt quickly. And I think that's the real key.
All right, fellas, any follow-up questions here, or what questions you've got jotted down? We can shift gears if you've got something completely unrelated to what he's shared so far.
Yeah, I've got two or three questions.
Yes, sir.
So if you said, I'm you're 20 years younger and you still have all the experience you have, and you're going to go plan a new church, or you're going to take on an established church, what are
Mhm.
some principles that you say this is what I, as a new pastor, need to do in this situation if I'm going to move towards DMM?
Mhm. Well, it'd be different for each of those. If I was taking on a church, um, certainly I would want to negotiate before I got there. The idea of what we might be doing, that I might not see Sunday morning as the anchor of what we do, um, and help them understand that my investment was going to be not solely in that space, um, and that I would be building this small culture, that could potentially look elitist. When you come in and you start working with people who gravitate to you, and people who will open up their time bandwidth to be able to meet and engage in concepts and be held accountable. Um, so I would want to raise that flag for people and say, here's what it's going to look like when I'm here, and here's what it's going to feel like. Some of you are going to feel left out, some of you are going to feel, that kind of stuff. If I'm starting with something that doesn't exist, I'm probably going to spend an enormous amount of time um, with them, helping them envision what could be. I would um, I would expose them to models like, say, Kansas City Underground, and I would help them. I would challenge them to say, what are we building here? Are we going to build a redemptive community, that is a collection agency, or is it a sending agency? And obviously, I'm going to fall on the sending agency side. I'm going to try to replace for them and this is where mindset. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Carol Dweck and her work on mindset, DWECK, Carol Dweck, CAROL. And there's a host of people, of her disciples. You can YouTube it and find all kinds of good stuff. But, um, metaphors, the mindsets that people have really drive their feelings and their emotions. And so you're trying to replace their metaphors. And so, we have, the prevailing metaphor is that this thing we call church is a collecting agency. It collects people and attempts to transform them with a timeless, powerful message, and then maybe, hopefully, send them out, possibly. But because the collecting agency is the stronger sense, there's not a big U-turn here. It's more one way, as opposed to having saying, we are a sending agency, just like any other sending agency. you know um, whoever, whatever tribe you're from, there are agencies that recruit and send people overseas. We are recruiting and sending people to our neighborhoods, to our workplaces. We are a sending agency, and we will do for these people the same kinds of things that a sending, cross-cultural sending agency does for their people. We will help them learn the language. We will help them figure out how to gain access. If they, if they need to do it full time, then we'll collect money and we'll, be able to provide that for them, so that they could, do this on a full time basis. But changing that metaphor would be the thing I would work really hard at in a new situation.